With any stoneworking that is not rock cut carving, there's a sort of a basic simple process, which is that first the stone has to be quarried, then it has to be transported to the site and often carved on the site, but not necessarily, and then the construction is made and the whole thing is finished. However, this gets divided up considerably. To talk first about the quarrying, what they would be hunting for is a place where they can get as large a block as they needed. What is usually done is that a squared, that is a cube of stone, is blocked out. In Roman times, the way they did it was that they carved channels around the two sides and the back of the block, and then carved a shallow channel in underneath and put wedges in and broke it free. And this type of quarrying was still being done in Marino, outside of Rome, in the quarrying of Peperino. And so you can see there the main difference is that in Marino they're using it's a soft enough stone where they can use a long point chisel and carve a narrow channel. The Romans carved using axes a channel wide enough for a workman to stand in it and cut it deeper as he went along. When they were carving drums for columns or carving columns themselves, where you could get a long enough one, as in granite, they tended to carve it as a cylinder, to quarry it as a cylinder rather than as a square block, so that they were, at least in Roman times, conscious of what the final form would be. What they did with figurative sculpture, at least in the archaic period, is that they would carve out the figure as if it was lying on its back in the quarry, so that the front and the two sides of the figure would be roughed out before it was released from the stone. A very interesting example, with many, many examples of it, is that the same thing was done on Easter Island, and we have in the quarries something like 380 of these moai, which are sort of simple figures, and they're all being carved out with the front face and the two side faces being finished before the block is released from the quarry. So this is a process which seems to have been a natural process because it exists in places which have absolutely no possible relationship to each other. Then, when they got the blocks on site, the question that's interesting is how much of the carving would they have done before they put them up, and how much would they put in place? We can presume that a certain amount of the carving was done on the ground. We don't know how far they went, and I think it was a rather flexible thing, because what is important in the construction of a stone building is the rhythm of construction. That is to say, once you started the construction, you are not going to stop working on the construction for a month while somebody finishes some carving. So what they would do is put it together and finish the carving on the work itself. And we have sufficient unfinished carving on Roman monuments all over the Roman world to make it clear that this was a common habit in Roman construction. I have done 42 capitals for a cloister in Chioggia on the south end of the Venetian lagoon. And that was exactly my experience, which was that the capitals had to go up when that was the time for them to go into place, because you could not stop the construction to wait for something. So that roughly a third of the capitals I had to finish carving them in place. So we have to consider Roman construction as a rather flexible thing, in which the decision to some extent of when something would be carved was left to this rhythm of construction, and that the carvers would be working on the ground on carvings, but that the carving, the block would be put in place when it was time for it to go in place, and that they would not have just stopped everything to wait for a carver to finish something. We have several examples of unfinished architecture or unfinished elements on architecture which help us understand the process of carving. One of them, a couple of them are on the Temple of Vespasian. Now, one of the things one should always remember about temple architecture is that the fluting on columns was always carved in place. This is because it would be impossible to carve the fluting on separate blocks and have them fit exactly together. There is also a block on the from the Temple of Vespasian that's up in the Capitoline, basement of the Capitoline Museum, and it shows the section that fitted into the wall of the Capitoline Hill. The left-hand side of it was left unfinished because it was not going to be visible. So what they did is they first carved this rough point chiseled molding. Then they carved the strip, which is the measuring strip. Then they carved the molding on the block itself. And then they came in and carved the decorative elements that exist as part of the molding. That is the sort of egg and dart and the other elements. And presumably, it would be normal if these were different teams of carvers. When I was working in a carving shop, doing my own work in a carving shop in Carrara, the carvers were divided according to carving sculpture. That is, one carver who specialized in roughing out the sculpture, another carver who specialized in doing the flesh on the figures, and another carver who specialized in doing the flowers that were being held, as often a Madonna holding flowers or a saint holding flowers. And these were specialties that they always worked in. There is some evidence in Indian carving that this type of thing was done, and there's some evidence in Roman carving that this type of division was a natural division of labor. That is, if you have a large workshop, you naturally divide up the labor between those who rough out and those who finish, at the very least.